Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Jared Mack on the show. Welcome to your Friday edition. A little later than normal if you listen to us on the regular right when the pod drops out. We apologize, but some news kept happening and kind of shuffling around the podcast. The topics we wanted to discuss. Jared, three verbal commitments from walk-on specialists this week. This becomes, I think, the focal point of the podcast. Most recently, on Friday morning, Alex Bales from Cincinnati, a kickoff specialist with a little bit of experience as a place kicker, he announced his commitment to Oregon, but also two punters joined the mix this week as well.
Yeah, two more punters and Adam Berry, a transfer out of Temple, and then Ross James, a junior college transfer. Both Berry and Bales put their names in the transfer portal from their respective schools. This is a result of Will Hutchinson ending the transfer portal, Race Malholm, and Cristiano Palazzo, all of which were three walk-on specialists. Will Hutchinson was the primary punter during the Oregon spring game, so if you watch that means you watched him. He did a good job then. It was a surprise that he entered the transfer portal, frankly, because it did seem like he was the number one guy at a spring camp because Tom Steve wasn't at spring camp. And we've seen a lot of Tom in the last 2 years. He's dealing with something back home is what Lanning said back in April. There's still not 100% clarity on that. There's still not 100% clarity if he'll be back or he won't be back by the start of fall. But Oregon isn't really waiting to figure that out. They went and got Andrew Boyle out of the transfer portal back in, I want to say, January or sometime like that. They pick up the three guys in the last 3 days, frankly, through the transfer portal again. You look at a guy like Berry, he's averaging over 40 yards a punt when he was at Temple. He hits the transfer portal. You look at a guy like Alex Bales. He's from Cincinnati, the college football playoff team. Racked up over 5,000 yards and kickoffs in his career with over 40 touchbacks. These guys are clear specialists. They're much needed because Oregon had Camden Lewis, and I think that was it on their roster heading into this upcoming season. So they're replenishing their moves. They're important moves, but they might not move the needle for most everybody. It's a shame that Eric can't be on the podcast to discuss the specialists because that's his mojo. That's his thing, man.
Yeah, this is his jam. I think most notably, though, you've got when you go in and you look at Oregon's full transfer roster for 2022, that would include Andrew Boyle from Washington State, another kicker. They have now added three players who have Division I experience kicking. I think that's a good deal.
And it's a lot different from the exactly. I was going to say it's a lot different from what Mario did.
Yeah,
where it was a lot of high school kids or even someone like Hank, who came on as a walk-on kicker from the soccer team. Yep. So, this is much different with these guys with actual legitimate D1 experience.
And these three guys have all played. I think that's something that matters. Is they're not just a walk-on at another D1 school that just never saw the field. I don't think any of these guys were the guy at their respected school, clear cut, but they all got on the field. They all played. I mean, Alex Bales was the kickoff specialist and then had a couple field goal attempts this past season. He had more than a handful of PAT attempts. So they've got experience on the field, and I think that matters. That's only going to push the competition level because these dudes have a taste of playing Division I football at a Power 5 level. I mean, Bales comes from a team that was in the college football playoff. Right. He's not coming here just to ride the bench. He wants an opportunity to play. So I think these all are going to push the current guys. And if Tom Snee is back, he's going to have to fight for his job. If Tom Snee is not back in 2022, Oregon's got some options. And Camden Lewis, don't know what that was.
Sound like a computer noise.
Sounds like it. Camden Lewis will have the ability to fight off some guys competing for his job. All in all, like you said, these aren't going to – the Richter scale of college football won't move a lot with these, but I think these are sneaky good additions.
Yeah. No, it won't move at all. But they are good additions, and I think it's important that you brought up that while none of these guys were like the dudes at their respective school, like they were all – most of them were starters. I mean, Adam Berry was Temple's primary punter. Like you said, Alex Bales was at Cincinnati's primary kickoff specialist. And honestly, if I'm an Oregon fan, and the last few years I've been watching kickoffs with Camden Lewis, I'm cool with a kickoff specialist.
Yep.
Like I think that is maybe it's not worthy of a scholarship spot if you're a football team, but that's worthy of going out in the portal and getting somebody who kind of serves the same purpose as what Camden Lewis can do, but is much better at kickoffs. And again, that's a weakness in Lewis's game. He was very good on field goals last year, which seemed to be a weakness. But again, it adds more competition. The old adage, the iron sharpens iron. Yeah. That's continuing at every position group for Oregon now, including specialists and kickers.
All right, let's transition over to some recruiting news on the site this weekend. Oregon's going to have a couple guys on campus. I think it's pretty important that we mention these because there is a possibility of some flips here. Oklahoma wide receiver commit Ashton Cozart. He's from Marcus High School in Flower Mound, Texas. But the story really here is he's from originally the Pacific Northwest. He's from Washington. This is a kid that moved during his high school season, I believe, or career to Texas. So he has ties to the state of to the Pacific Northwest. He's going to be on campus this weekend. This is important because Oregon has tried to keep this really low under the radar until Friday when it really started to leak out. Oklahoma does not allow other commits to visit schools, or their commits to visit other schools, a la what Peterson did at Boise State and Washington, what Chip Kelly did at Oregon a long time ago. If you commit to Oklahoma, you don't visit other schools. You're done. Cozart is coming to Oregon despite being committed to Oklahoma. And I think this is an opportunity for Oregon to add another receiver. I mean, is he going to flip this weekend? It's possible. I'm not going to say it's going to happen or it's not going to happen, but this is a good move. Looking at his offer list and what Oregon has at receiver, I like this run at a commit.
Certainly. Cozart's a good football player. He's a top 200 player in the country. Almost 6'3", 180. Or it certainly doesn't help, or certainly doesn't not help to add more wide receiver talent if you're Oregon. Quick little rant. The you're committed here, you can't take other visits rule. Stupid. I think it's dumb. I think I'll just stop it there. I could go on for a long time, but Cozart as a flip would certainly set the stage for another recruiting victory for Oregon. Obviously, I think it's really important for Oregon to keep on their hot streak, especially in the class of 2023. I watched a good amount of tape from Cozart. After the news that he was visiting, I really like who he is as a player. He's not the fastest. It says on his 24/7 profile that he ran a 4.45 40. Take that as what you will. He's got an impressive offer list. I mean, committing to Oklahoma, I know they don't have Lincoln Riley, but that's one of the better programs in the country. Alabama's going after him. He's got offers from Michigan and Missouri and all these SEC schools. He's a solid player. He runs really smooth. He uses his height and his skills really well. If Oregon were to land this, it'd be a nice, huge commitment. But I do think the underlying portion of this, which you mentioned, Matt, is that he played his freshman season of high school football at Kennedy Catholic in Seattle and Washington, and I think that plays such a huge role here for Oregon and their ability to potentially steal him, I guess. And again, that you think like most Pacific Northwest teams would be in on him, and I think that they are, and I think that Oregon getting him to visit and convincing him to come out to Eugene, I think, is a huge step.
Also on campus this weekend is another verbal commitment to another school in the Southwest, and that is Johnny Bowens, a four-star defensive lineman who's committed to the Texas A&M Aggies, a top 200 player in the eyes of 24/7 Sports, 32nd best defensive lineman in the country, a guy that has offers from SEC, Big 12, AAC schools. Johnny will be on campus this weekend as well for a visit, and I like this move. There's a lot of connections with Oregon, most notably Johnny Bowman's, I'm sure, has a relationship with Oregon's Marshall Malkow, a really, really talented, connected chief of recruiting at Oregon. I'm sure he played a big factor in getting Johnny to commit to the Aggies. And so I think you look at this player, and this is just an opportunity for Oregon to make a run at a defensive lineman that, quite frankly, is hard to find out west.
Yeah, you're not wrong when those are hard to find out west. I really like what Johnny brings to the table. Honestly, you could watch his huddle film of his last season, his junior year highlights, and just watch the first play and be like, okay, yeah, this guy's pretty good. He really reminds me of Brandon Dorlus, like Brandon Dorlus year 2 at Oregon, where he started to emerge as a true prospect. He's big, he's physical, he's quick off the ball, he uses his hands really well. I'm going to steal a Cristobal phrase, and that he was heavy-handed. I love it. This kid is heavy-handed. He drives through the offensive lineman. He plays 6A in high school in Texas, which is, I think, is the top of their list there. He was all 6A state team. This guy's really talented, and if he were a defensive line prospect, if he lived in Mission Viejo in California, I think he'd be much higher ranked as he is. But because he's in Texas, it's the amount of really good players from Texas is impressive. Again, this is another huge thing. I'm sure Marshall Malkow had some opportunity to get in his ear and say, hey, come out to Oregon. We're building something special here. But again, this is another great testament to, a lot of Dan Lanning's staff maybe didn't have West Coast connections at first. They're certainly getting it now, but they're still going back to their old stomping grounds at Texas A&M, at Baylor, stuff like that, and getting these guys to still come out here and at least, consider the fact that Oregon could be a school for them. I think that's what they're doing here with Johnny Bowens.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens. Jared, there's throwing this in here. We haven't talked about it pre-show, but there's also some rumors that Caleb Chapman, a receiver from Texas A&M, 6'5". I think he is a junior in 2022. COVID has everything all messed up. There's some rumors he could be also on campus this weekend. Injuries have certainly hurt his playing career at A&M. Twice he's been out for the season with injuries. So he's a guy who maybe hasn't had the career he expected. He's entered the transfer portal. A 4-star composite receiver, 6'5", 2 years of eligibility. He's looking at Oregon too. I mean, Oregon, there's something there. Oregon is dabbling with a couple transfer receivers, and now Caleb Chapman has emerged as another target. I'm kind of surprised at that. Maybe it's a numbers issue. I don't know, but I'm just a little surprised that they keep looking at transfer portal receivers.
I mean, 2 years eligibility is really nice there.
Yeah.
I think they could certainly still use to add one. Again, this is what Chapman could probably talk about, his experiences with injuries. And if Oregon goes down 2 wide receivers who go out for, 3-4 weeks at a time, that receiver room looks a lot smaller. And I'd say they're at a good number now compared to where they were. But bringing in him and Casper up until, when summer camp starts or fall camp begins, like in August, that I don't think there's any reason to not like it. There are probably other positions of need. I would wholeheartedly agree with probably need some cornerbacks here, some safeties. But if this is another Marshall Malco type of situation where he knows this guy and there's playing time here, he's a 6'5" wide receiver. You don't find those often.
Yes.
Those don't grow on trees. If he's healthy and can make an impact, you might as well try to bring him in. He's got 2 years, so that would use a scholarship for both years. But again, if this player is healthy, he's a 4-star recruit coming out of high school. He has some talent. I think you can use him kind of like you would a tight end, or honestly, you could use him to just train Kyler Casper and say, hey, this is how you use somebody with your size. Like, this is how you do it. It might not be the worst thing in the world. But yeah, going after a wide receiver is kind of interesting. I wouldn't expect that to be high on their priority list. But then again, Oregon hasn't had an offense that's been really high on wide receivers for the last couple of years. So I'm not accustomed to how important they put a price or whatever it is on a wide receiver. And with Kenny Dillingham's offense and what we saw, at least during the spring game, it's that wide receivers are going to be used, and they want different versions of every type. They want tall and short. They want fast. They want guys who catch the ball in the middle of the field. I'm in for it. This is a kind of a trust the staff situation at first, and maybe it works out for them, maybe it doesn't. But I don't think it would be terrible if they took this guy in.
Your Kyle Casper comparison is pretty interesting. That kind of could create like a, hey, Kyler, if you're ready, you're ready, and you'll help. But if you're not ready, it's okay. We don't need you this season. We'd love to have you, but we don't need you. I've tried talking a lot about this in basketball, where you don't want to require a 5-star freshman to be your number 1 or number 2 guy, just because of the pressure, and he's never played college ball before. And I think this kind of maybe applies to Casper. So I like that comparison as well. That's certainly one to look into, and maybe that's a reason why they're interested in Caleb Chapman. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, the Pac-12 made some changes to how they will pit Pac-12 Championship Game opponents against one another, and it's pretty interesting. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm and Jared Mack here on the show. The Pac-12 this week, Jared, introduced a change to the Pac-12 Championship Game format. They are doing away with divisions starting in 2022. This was always kind of like, hey, it's probably going to be 2023. And like the day one when the legislation was passed by the NCAA that conferences could eliminate divisions, the league shot out a release saying we're doing it, and it's happening in 2022. And instead, we're going to pit the 2 highest winning percentage teams in the conference in conference games to face off in the Pac-12 Championship Game. And if you go back in history, there's been 11 Pac-12 Championship games. And if you go back in history, 5 of them would have had different outcomes.
I think it's a smart move. I think it gives the audience, the viewership, the fan bases of every team, I think it gives them more of a reason to cheer in this game. There have been, countless opportunities where what you thought were the best two teams in the Pac-12, or maybe they're from the same division, and they face off against each other, and obviously one team wins and one team doesn't, and they have the tiebreaker, and then that team that you don't think is as good, heads in to the Pac-12 Championship Game. Kind of like how Oregon and Stanford would be in the mid to late 2010s, where they'd play each other, and it wouldn't matter who was the better team. In the season, all that mattered who was the better team that night in terms of who could get to the Pac-12 Championship Game. So again, I think this is a good move. I'm a little surprised that it went immediately right after it was announced. I'd imagine they would take a year. It's gonna be a little sad not having like a real Pac-12 North and Pac-12 South. I guess this is going to be the end of all divisions in college football, which will then turn into the end of all conferences, and then it'll be the end of college football. So we're going down the yellow brick road as we speak. So I'm just kind of interested to see how this will all play out in year one, and if the Pac-12 will A, remember the rules that they created, and B, if they'll figure out a system that will help them, because I don't know, it could be a fun one to watch them kind of figure it out on the fly.
If you're curious about what changes would have happened if they had the system in place from the very beginning, year one, 2011, when Oregon was number 9 and they played UCLA and Autzen, that game would not have happened, and that game would not have been played at Autzen Stadium. It would have been at Stanford. It would have been number 4 Stanford against number 9 Oregon. I think that was a team a lot of Duck fans will argue is the greatest team in Oregon history. That was a loaded unit. They had a ton of talent, and they just couldn't get to the Pac-12. They just couldn't get to the championship game. You also could say in 2012, the next season, that team again would have had a different outcome. This is another one that Duck fans would argue could be one of the best teams ever at Oregon. It was number 8 Stanford taking on number 16 UCLA, and had this policy been in place, the game would have been Oregon-Stanford, because the Ducks were number 5 in the country. They did not make the Pac-12 championship game because they did not beat Stanford in the Zach Ertz game. And back-to-back years, you would have 2 top 10 matchups, Oregon versus Stanford. That would have been awesome. 2015, it would have been Stanford against Oregon. And I think a lot of Duck fans, a lot of people in the conference would argue if Vernon Adams never hurt his pinky that season against Michigan State, week 1 against Eastern Washington, Oregon's season is probably a lot different. And shoot, Mark Helfrich could have been the head coach. That team was loaded late in the year when Vernon Adams got healthy again. They were very, very good. And then a couple changes again. 2018, it would have been Washington against Washington State, against Washington versus Utah. And then in 2020, Washington would have not been the Pac-12 North representative, which they couldn't play in, which allowed Oregon to go into that game to play and beat USC. Instead, it would have been USC versus Colorado. And I think in that one instance, Jared, that probably would have been the year where you don't want this policy in effect. Colorado was not the number 25 team in the country. They benefited from playing a shortened season. USC probably would have gotten into the Pac-12, would have won and would have made the Fiesta Bowl. Maybe Clay Helton would be still the head coach, and that's probably not a good thing for the conference.
No, and but that's the one outlier. Everything else is a situation where those would have been better matchups than the originals. Granted, the originals were good as well, but it's a bunch of top 10 matchups. Even that Washington State season,
that would have been fantastic.
That would have been a very fun game. And I know that's it's the whole state of Washington, so that kind of leaves if you live in California, you might not be the biggest fan of that. But again, those are just better matchups. It's better television. Frankly, it's a better way to get other people in the country to watch the Pac-12 when it's not just Oregon or Utah against the Pac-12 North champion if the Pac-12 North stinks, or it's the Pac-12 North against when the Pac-12 South stinks. It's just a better way to get better football out on the field and on your television. So I appreciate it. At least they're trying.
Yeah.
You know, they're just trying to be better as an organization in the Pac-12. We'll see if it sticks. I think it should. I think other conferences will follow suit. I think that this was something where the Pac-12 wanted to get out in front of and be like, oh, this is our idea.
Now, the next fallout from this is scheduling. The release stated that the 2022 football conference football schedule would remain in place based upon 2 divisions for this upcoming season, but scheduling scenarios for seasons beyond 2022 will continue to be reviewed. And there's a lot here. You can't do away with rivalries. I mean, you want to see Oregon versus Washington every single year. It's one of the most lucrative games the conference has. You want to see Oregon USC every single year if you can make that happen. The California schools want to play each other every single year. And then you've got 8 out of the 12 teams all asking to play inside the conference or inside the state of California for recruiting purposes. To the point, I think Utah and Colorado had guarantees made to them when they joined the conference that every certain amount of years they would be playing in the state of California. So how they come up with a scheduling format should be interesting. They're probably going to go pod. I'm okay with that. But the league has got to ensure that the league's best teams every year, or the teams that attract the most eyeballs, play each other. Those matchups play each other every single year. And at the same time, you need to create some kind of balance where Oregon, for example, isn't getting an easy road and USC has to play this gauntlet schedule of teams. You gotta kind of do what the SEC does and make sure your top 3 or 4 teams kind of get the marquee schedule.
They absolutely do, and they need to go down to 8 games first in the conference.
Yes, that needs to happen.
That first needs to happen. Man, I mean, they do need to have everybody go against each other. The fact that like Oregon and Washington, they play every year, that's fantastic. But the fact that Washington doesn't play USC or Oregon doesn't play USC, or they both don't play UCLA every single year or Utah every single year, whatever the case may be, that stinks. That's just money lost for the Pac-12. That's viewership lost. That's great potential games, all-timers lost. They do need to follow the Big 12 and the SEC models where it's like, if you're Alabama or Georgia or Auburn or LSU, guess what? You're going to play everybody who's really good in the SEC. And it doesn't matter if you're really good because those games are going to happen. So, and I think that incentivizes teams to stay good. It has to, because they know that they're going to go against Alabama and Georgia every year. And they don't want to get the floor wiped. But that's what the Pac-12 needs to do. The struggle is, at least for the last couple seasons, is that the Pac-12 wasn't really sure if they would have one of those great teams. You know, the SEC knows that they're going to have Bama and Georgia and LSU and these guys be good teams. They're going to be in the conversation until the end of the year. If the Pac-12 were to do that with their so-called great teams going into the season, it might not work. It might lead them with, their best team coming out with 3 losses at the end of the year. And so I could see where they wanted to save face and try to give the benefit of the doubt to their best teams, like set Oregon up with a stage to potentially punch their ticket to the college football playoffs with a road game against ASU and a freshman quarterback. But that's the problem, is that sometimes even when it's, it seems like it is scheduled for them to do well, the Pac-12 team doesn't come out on the other side.
Yes, that happens far too many times.
Yeah.
All right, let's wrap it up with this. Maybe the craziest press conference. I watched it live. Jared, did you watch Jimbo Fisher's reaction to Nick Saban's press conference live, or did you catch the YouTube version of it?
I watched all the videos. I didn't watch them live.
Just absolutely insane of a press conference. I've been in a couple where you walk out going, "Oh my God, that whole thing was awesome." This was just insane. There's no really way to describe it. If you somehow missed it, the night before, Wednesday night, Nick Saban was at some kind of like booster event or something.
Yeah.
And was on the mic and accused Texas A&M of buying all of its recruits in the 2022 recruiting class. That's why they signed maybe the best recruiting class ever in the recruiting era. They finished obviously number one. Saban noted that Alabama finished number two, but he doesn't believe that's going to be sustainable if schools are going to be buying players. He since then has backtracked those comments a little bit, but Jimbo came out on Thursday morning fired up, accusing. I mean, he called Saban a narcissist. He was very adamant that he will never talk to him again. Said that Saban is a bad person essentially. Huge blow up story, and I think why are we talking about this on this podcast? I think we're starting to see cracks in the parity across college, the lack of parity in college football. Yes, A&M and University of Texas are two of the richest programs in the country, if not the two. They have insane boosters with massive oil money. That is some context you need to know. But we're starting to see recruits take advantage of the opportunities that they have ahead of them and not go status quo and just go to the 3 or 4 best schools in college football. And I think this is yet another sign that, hey, some of the blue bloods are getting a little feisty here because other schools are starting to land players just, for various reasons, NIL, playing time, coaches, what have you. And, we're starting to see a very slow drip of talent distribution spread out across college football.
Yes. I thought it went a different way.
Okay.
I thought maybe mine's a little more conspiracy theory here, but to me, it sounded like Nick Saban was asking for money from his boosters.
Ooh, I mean, that could be it.
Because, and I say this because Saban went out and he didn't accuse Texas A&M of cheating or breaking any rules.
Correct.
He said that these are the rules that are in place and they took advantage of it. But it was interesting that Saban specifically mentioned people, schools, and players basically by name, and mentioned that Travis Hunter of Jackson State got $1 million, which he denied on Twitter. It was out there that he might have gotten it. We'll probably never know if he ever got $1 million, but Saban directly mentioned him by name and the price tag that he got. Or a player from Miami got $400,000 over 2 years,
which we know is true because the guy that paid him told us all.
Right. It was interesting though that he mentioned those specific price tag figures, where it's like Saban was basically like, well, they could get the number one player in the country for $1 million. Did you hear that? Did you hear that, boosters? All I need is 1.2. That's all I need to get the number one player in the country for next year. Did you hear that, boosters? $400,000 over 2 years. We can't do $600,000 over 3. Make it more. That's how I took it. I think Saban really messed up by mentioning people by name.
Yes.
If he's, old man yells at cloud, the Simpsons meme. I get that. He was that like 6 years ago when he complained about the up-tempo offense.
Yep.
What are they doing now? Up-tempo offense. They have a Heisman quarterback in Bryce Young. They have a Heisman wide receiver just 2 years ago in Devontae Smith. I think it'll all all change. I think it's all kind of just for show. I think the rest of the country is just going to continue to move on and play by the NIL rules. And I also think Alabama 100 million% plays by the NIL rules. Like Bryce Young has like $1 million deal down there in Tuscaloosa. And I think another fun thing was like all the players who talked about how kids at both schools were basically being paid before NIL.
Yeah.
And like kind of admitting that happened. I mean, we all knew that happened.
Yep.
I mean, I still don't, I can't tell you the reason why a former Alabama quarterback who now plays for the Miami Dolphins, why he had his whole family somehow get up and move from Hawaii to Tuscaloosa and have a house and everything like that at Alabama. It happens, and I think everybody knew it, and I don't think that a lot of people cared. I think Saban is really upset that he doesn't have the number one recruiting class and now has to go against Texas A&M, who isn't, I would say 100% isn't at the same level as Alabama is on the football field. When he has to go against Georgia, I don't think it's that big of a deal. But now that A&M has entered the fray with that money, I don't think that he's a big fan of it. I did look up public school endowments because clearly schools with money are going to help here. And the UT system and Texas A&M University system are the highest. But it's interesting after that because these are schools that should make a difference in NIL because of the money that they have, but just kind of don't. You have like University of Pittsburgh and UNC Chapel Hill, Washington, Wisconsin, Michigan State. Like there are a lot of, schools that have a lot of cash behind them, but not a lot of it's going to football.
Yeah.
And I think that's the major difference.
This also was something that I thought was hilarious because I don't think Jimbo ever once denied that his recruits got NIL deals. It was just that Texas A&M didn't give them those deals, didn't buy those players. It was the collective.
Right. He has the third party.
Yeah, that he has no idea of what they're doing, which is kind of funny. And then Saban is out here saying, hey, A&M bought all these guys when no, they didn't, but they kind of did. Like it was like
they didn't.
It was just a whole bunch of just like schematics. They're all just talking about how they phrased it, and the other guy's upset about how it was phrased and yada yada yada. When, like you said, players have from both schools have kind of come out and be like, yeah, we've gotten this. This is the way it's been. And it all in all, like I just go back to the Mike Brey, Notre Dame head basketball coach, the quote he had a couple weeks back, where he was talking to other assistant coaches saying, like, we get paid a lot of money to coach a sport. Do we agree or not agree? Like that's up for debate about NIL, but it's here. And we get paid because we get paid a lot of money. It's either adapt or die. Like we shouldn't complain. Like we have a very good job. We're well compensated compared to most Americans out there. Adapt or die. And that's kind of where I fall in this is like Saban may not like this at all and argue. And I may not think, I don't like how, we're seeing recruits just go to the highest bidder, but that's the world we kind of live in right now. And if you're not going to adapt to that, your program's going to go by the wayside and eventually die.
Yeah. And I mean, the money that these kids make seems astronomical at this stage, at this point during the NIL era. But it's nothing compared to what the schools make off their football programs and their basketball programs and what the NCAA makes. They're a nonprofit, but they pull in billions of dollars a year. I think just March Madness, and I know everybody's heard this, but just March Madness makes over $1 billion for the NCAA. And so these kids could have been paid by the NCAA with the amount of money that they have, but they decided to go third party and let boosters and donors and help all of that. And yeah, people are going to be mad, and that's okay. Um, I think people will be mad until their school starts to do it,
Yeah.
and then realizes that everyone's doing this. But I don't think it's going to really change how recruits look at schools. I think the best schools in the country are still going to get the best players in the country. I think that's kind of always how it's been. I don't think Alabama's going to stop recruiting. I don't think Georgia's going to stop recruiting. Texas A&M didn't have like a number one class before this, but they were still a very good recruiting school. I think obviously it's going to help Oregon. It should help other Pac-12 schools. It should help USC. But those are all really big schools that I just mentioned. I don't think it's going to have that much parity in the long run. And I think the market will correct itself. I think NIL will be a thing in the past in a couple of years, maybe because states and their legislative branches change the rules because someone complains too much that it's not fair. But until that point, I think you gotta live in the moment and not in the past.
I think to wrap this up, Zach Soskin, he works with NIL and branding. He is a University of Oregon alum. I should note that. He tweeted out during this, I thought a perfect way to capulate this. Advice to coaches: there's no winning a NIL PR battle. Stay above the fray. Shaming a rival for NIL makes you look archaic, hypocritical. Denying you use NIL makes you look dishonest. And bragging about NIL publicly only puts an unnecessary target on your kids and your program. I think it's a tough world for a college coach to be in. And unfortunately for them, probably the best way to go about it is don't talk about it publicly. Really, don't say much. Certainly talk about it with your recruits. Certainly talk about it with your players and your staff and whatnot. But to go out here and do what both Saban and Jimbo have done, to do what Miami is currently doing, you're only putting yourself in a really tough spot. And to tie it around, I think Oregon's done a really good job of they talk about it, but they don't really talk about it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. With Texas A&M, and it's when they talk about it, it's interesting, like with Saban and Jimbo. But for Miami, it's not really coming out of Cristobal's lips. It's really just like their boosters who are paying for everything, and for them, it's like one dude, it's like one billionaire who's just paying for everything, and that's basically all you need. For Oregon, when they talk about it, it's through their division street. It's never through like independent resellers or independent boosters. So I think that's a good way to go about it. I'm sure that can't happen at every school, but it was a fun Thursday in terms of college football news in the middle of May. So yes. I'll take it.
Middle of May, we get football news, plenty to talk about. It's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Thank you for listening to the show. I'll be back on Monday with a mailbag. Jared will be in sunny Arizona covering baseball. But we will get Eric back on the podcast for our Monday mailbag. Until then, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.
Peace.